There are plenty of ways to establish a scene in comics, but Darwyn Cooke shows off one in Selina's big score that is done pretty excellently in how to establish a true sense of location. You're watching Strip Panel Naked, I'm Hass, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. So Cooke has a couple of approaches to establishing location, but let's start with the more obvious and traditional one, which is to use the first panel of the page as the establishing shot. This is what you'll see most often in monthly comics, where space is at a premium, and you've got about 20-ish pages to tell your story. So in these moments, such as the introduction to Falcone right here, what you get typically is a large panel that shows off where we are. In this case, we're in this big house. Cooke does a bit more with it though, because he's giving you the scale and grandeur of this place, so whatever you already know about Falcone, you're also learning he's wealthy, he's in this beautifully big open house, beautiful women around him. It tells you stuff about the character information, but it also gives you that necessary location information, and it's all done in one single panel. And the reason Cooke is able to get away with that is that mostly he will split that page. So typically you might see a very dense paneled page, but when Cooke needs to do an establishing shot, he'll open up the top of the page and get a big open space to kind of fit all these elements in there. And this is just something Cooke likes to do. If you look later in the story, there's two characters having a conversation next to a car. Again, we get the same thing. First panel is this big open one, it gives a high angle view of the scene so we can see all the elements of play. So when Cooke goes into the rest of the page, he doesn't need to do much with the backgrounds because we've already established where we are, and we've learned little bits and pieces about the location. A big part of these moments is really trying to establish a feeling beyond just knowing where we are. It's about adding some contextual information to the locations which gives us a real sense of place. Here, for example, when we're outside Swifty's pawn shop, that's what looks like a casino or slots or something in the background. You know, there's a scantily clad woman very big in the foreground. Buildings are all kind of condensed together and stacking like falling over each other, so it feels sort of deeper in a city, maybe a little bit off the beaten track, around a back road somewhere. And that's all built into the language in a beautiful way because it tells us something about this place. It's not the most expensive street in the city, it's not frequently visited, you know, it's kind of that seedy back alley kind of feel. And because we learn that, we also then get to learn a sense of location and sense of place, so that tells us something about Swifty's pawn shop. Beyond just the fact it's a pawn shop, it also tells us about where it is, what kind of location it might be, the kind of people that may go there. So he's actually condensing all this information into this one panel. What's also interesting with Cooke is how he can get away with just a small, simple panel as a location setting moment. So here is another moment from Swifty's, and this time the focus is on Chantel, it's kind of her page. And there is a caption that explains it's Swifty's, of course, with a sliver of the logo, but the emphasis here seems to be more on where they are in relation to Swifty's. Because we've already been given a shot of Swifty's in this comic book, so we already kind of get this sense of knowing where it is. So now what we do is we compound that information. So now we think, okay, it's a building on top of Swifty's, so we know what kind of neighborhood it's in, we know what kind of clientele or people will frequent that neighborhood, and so we already get a sense of that location just from this one small panel. It's referencing something that we previously understand and then literally building on top of it to give us more contextual information while drawing on the information we've already learned as a reader. I suppose that is kind of simple, but it also does require some forethought into actually building that into the story. So that's one thing that Cooke does, he puts the location panel at the start of the page. But there is another thing, and this is maybe more exciting visually, is giving almost entire pages to establishing location. It's an extrapolation of those bigger establishing panels, but it's kind of given more room to breathe, something that is easier to get away with when you're doing a longer book rather than a monthly comic, and this was more of a graphic novel. So there's a handful of these through Selina's big score, so let's take a look at how they work. Okay, so here's the introduction to Gotham, and this is one of the first ones in the book. So mostly they all work in the same way, which is to be decidedly non-linear, apart from the final panel. It's essentially a cross-section of imagery, something I referred to previously as almost like B-cam footage from a film, the cutaway shots that wouldn't ordinarily make it into the comic because you don't have time for them. We're shot of the airport, which tells us this place is a city or a big city feel, a location card, just so we know where we are, but also shots of bright lights, 24-hour opening times, people kind of menacingly staring at you, women's figures in doorways, run-down areas away from the lights, money being passed carefully behind the back of a policeman. That tells you so much about this place, and it does give a sense of Gotham City as a real location. We might not be visiting all these places, but it's kind of saying like, this is what this place looks like. A single title card that just says like Gotham City, it just doesn't do that. It tells you the name of the place and it asks you to get back into the story. And ultimately it doesn't really mean much if you don't understand that place already. Okay, so here's a different one. Here's Miami Beach. Palm trees, big hotels, oranges, lizards, private beaches. The palette by Matt Hollingsworth also changes dramatically to show off the sun-bleached summer feel of the location. So you can place these two pages next to each other and you can see the similarities in composition pretty quickly. The smaller panels on the side and a larger panel next to them, but the feeling you get from these two pages is both complete and very different. The power of these pages is not only to build location, but to take a moment to breathe as they work as good chapter markers to kind of calm down for a moment before throwing you back into the story. There's nothing to ingest specifically beyond just understanding the tapestry of the images. But the other thing they do, and I guess this is what's more exciting to me, is that they ask you to build it together as a reader. Okay, so like this Las Vegas page, it's presenting a very specific part of Vegas, and so I'm seeing all these images together here, you know, the lights of the strip, people sat playing slots, the smiles. There's a kind of artifice to the whole thing that seems to pop out to me, and that is me putting that on there. And I'm putting it together myself, but Cooke is offering up the palette for me to taste, so to speak. We're being asked to become more involved, but also get something back from that. And I love when comics ask you to do that. And it also speaks to the idea that location is valuable beyond just context, and I love that. I think that is so important. If story involves suspension of disbelief, it involves us buying into the realities of the worlds presented to us, and location is incredibly important in that. It's exciting to see someone treat location as an exercise in world building in a way that isn't just pure exposition, but told through a visual collection of moments that together build an overall feeling of a place. Cooke, along with Hollingsworth on colours, seems to have a solid grasp on exactly what we need to see to understand these places, even in the moments where he just uses the single establishing shot. And that is just good comics. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, you can check out the Patreon page where there's years worth of extra analytical writing on comics. You can follow me on Twitter at HassanOE or grab a copy of the Eisner nominated magazine I edit at gumroad.com/panelxpanel. Finally, hit subscribe and the notification bell to keep up to date with all the latest episodes, and I'll see you next time.